What's going on, guys, and welcome back. Hope you're having a better day than the most publicly hated card in Marvel Snap that only has 10 days left until a major nerf is coming her way. We got an over-the-air balance patch today, and it wouldn't be Marvel Snap if this didn't come out of nowhere. But more importantly, we got some big news concerning some weekly balance changes to keep the game fresh and get away from a stale meta that the game has been plagued by for a little while. Now, we're going to start with the buffs and nerfs that affected some cards that desperately needed it, as well as my opinion on those changes. And then we will turn our attention to probably what is the biggest news, and that is the weekly balance patch changes. Now, Shuri, we don't know exactly what they're going to do to nerf her. We just know that it is incoming. But Shuri's #1 best friend that everybody obviously sees on pretty much a daily basis, no matter where you are on the ladder, is RedSkull. And he did get a slight adjustment going from a 513 to a 512. Now, they did say this could be a temporary change. Once Shuri does get that nerf, they might bring him back depending on how it affects the card. But it's nice that we have a little bit of a nerf to address it a small bit until the time being. Now, I don't think this is going to impact Shuri all that much. We might see a bit more Captain Marvel and Vision Shuri play for the next 10 days and a little bit less RedSkull, but I think this was a small band-aid nerf, so don't worry about it all too much. But let's talk about some of the bigger nerfs that will affect you, and that is going to be, first of all, SunSpot, who is the most dominating by far one-cost card in Marvel Snap. It is the meta one-cost. It's in almost every deck, and it's one of the most played cards in the game. You're going to be seeing SunSpot in about 50+% of your matches for a good reason. Now, he went from a 1-1 down to a 1-0, which I think is good. You can look at it two ways. It could be a buff that he can't be Shang-Chi'd as much, or a nerf that you can't get him to like a 7 power as easily. I think this is a nice change. This is what me and everybody else was kind of clamoring for and wanting. I think 1-0 still really does his job just fine. You're not going to have that opening priority. That's kind of what you sacrifice, but it still can build up to a great card, and it's going to serve the purpose of SunSpot. I don't think this is going to change his meta play all that much, because it's great to not, waste any energy and have it go directly to a card. So SunSpot, pretty big change. Like to see it, and again, I think it's still pretty safe to slot into your decks. But with this, I do think Kitty Pryde is going to kind of take over as one of the better one-cost drops. But when this happened to Angela got changed from a 2-1 to a 2-0. It did change her meta impact somewhat significantly. So time will tell. We're going to have to see truly what this does for SunSpot. Now, next, we have a card that has been buffed that pretty much nobody has. In fact, he is the least played card in Marvel Snap. Shadow King went from a 4-3 down to a 3-3. The King is going to be pretty legit as a tech card. Now, if you guys follow me on Twitter, you saw that I posted a clip the other day of using Shadow King to counter heavily the meta that is currently out there. Angela, Bishop, Wolfsbane, SunSpot, Shuri, you name it, this guy can set them back down to their original stats. Taking something like an Angela from a 2-8 down to a 2-0 on the last turn of the game is massive. But for the 4 cost, it just never made sense, and thus nobody played him. Now, I did say I put him in my Sarah Miracle decks, and if you had Zabu out there too, he only was 2 cost, and that made a lot of sense for the effect that he does. But now, just with Sarah, he could be a 2-cost card, and I think this is a major play for him as a decent tech card to throw into your decks. Now, on top of that, I think Silver Surfer got a major boost from this as well, as Surfer needed some type of tech card help outside of Cosmo, and I think that Shadow King is going to provide that against some of these stronger decks against it, like Shuri. Overall, pretty pumped about the Shadow King change. I don't think you should buy him yet, but I will have a video out on him in the future. Now, alongside Shadow King, we also had a card that was pretty much just a meme card. Nobody was playing him. He was alongside the rest of the January cards that just flat out sucked because they were probably tuned with the old Zabu meta, and that is Sentry. Sentry is going from a 4-8 and a 4-8 void to a 4-10 and a 4-10 void. Now, this is a pretty massive change, both a buff and a nerf. Obviously, Shang-Chi can just completely destroy him, but at the same time, you want to try to play Sentry into Cosmo lanes, so that will prevent that, and it's just more base power overall. But also, guys, the Viper play with the Void used to be somewhat gimmicky, and now I think it actually has some bones to it. Now, if you play Viper and you have her slotted in the deck, I think a -10 bomb you can send to the opponent's side for either 2 energy or even 1 if you put this into a Sarah deck. It's gonna be pretty huge. I really like this change, and I'm excited to see Sentry maybe get a bit more competitive. Now, that's really it for the card balance changes as a whole. This was kind of a temporary over-the-air balance patch, as they said, and we can expect to see a bigger one in about 10 days. However, that takes us to probably the biggest news of this patch, and that is going to be the balancing future of Marvel Snap. Now, they have now addressed that we will be seeing card buffs and sometimes nerfs every single week on Thursdays. Now, with this, there's typically 2 schools of thought, right? People either want changes to keep the meta fresh, or people don't want changes because it feels like there's just too much changing and they never know what is a good card and what is a good deck. And it sounds like this is a very healthy middle ground, and they are aware of just too much change. So don't worry if you're kind of freaking out if they're going to be changing cards way too much. It's small adjustments of just power like we saw today. They have a huge list of buffs that they need to do, and they said a small list of nerfs that they're going to make, and essentially they'll be prioritizing them based on the individual changes. They don't want to launch them all out at once, right? You want to see how one change performs and then how that affects the other cards around it. We've seen this before in the past, and sometimes in the case of something like Spider-Woman, it's a small change that makes the card a little bit better and more played overall, and that's kind of what we're looking for as a community. Take the cards that never get played, give them a little love, and each week you can either dial or, adjust those knobs. If it was too good, you bring it back. If it was too bad, you scale it up, right? So again, we could just be sitting here for a while until some of these cards are playable. Take Crystal, right? How much do they have to make her in better power to be playable alongside some of the least played cards in Snap? But in the case of, let's say, Shadow King, they can also adjust the cost, which I think is very important as well. Now, these changes on every Thursday are mainly going to be focused on buffs. I want to make that known, not nerfs, which I think is a great thing, right? We don't want to always be nerfing cards that you guys bought with tokens, right? For everybody that hates Shuri, there's the people that only use the only tokens they saved up to get Shuri, which is why I think they're taking some time to make sure they don't destroy the card as a whole. But again, her days are going to be limited. Now, outside of that, guys, they're really just talking about how long they plan to do this. And essentially, they said they're going to do a trial period in May. And depending on how it goes, they're going to pretty much implement this for a new chapter of Marvel Snap. I cannot tell you guys how much this was needed. We needed a nice, fresh change on pretty much a weekly basis to keep things fresh in the game. And if you're on the side of hating too much change, I don't think it's going to be near as bad as you think. And, let's just give it a little bit of time to see how it all plays out. So there you go, guys. That is going to be the changes. We have weekly buffs and sometimes nerfs. We have some changes to some popular and forgotten cards in Marvel Snap. And I want to hear from you guys down below. What are your thoughts? 1 through 10. What do you think of these changes? Are you happy? Are you mad? And again, if you're on the camp of being mad or if you're happy, just know we got to let some time to kind of flush out and see how this all settles for the game. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. We'll be making plenty of content with all this in mind. And until the next one, my friends, happy snapping.